Welcome to Breakthrough Success. I am your host, Marc Guberti, the content marketing expert, bringing you 3 new episodes each week where I and top-level guests teach you how to take your business to the next level and achieve your breakthrough. And when we think about our businesses and what kind of breakthroughs we want to achieve, we should be thinking about the peak performance. What is our version of the peak performance? What is it that we are going after? That's what we're going to talk about in this episode. The guest who joins us today, he is a peak performance coach who helps CEOs maximize their focus, energy, and productivity. He also hosts the Daily Habits podcast, where he interviews CEOs, world experts, athletes, and professionals from all over the world. Today's guest for episode 330 of the Breakthrough Success podcast is none other than Nick Elvery. Nick, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show.
I really appreciate you having me on. Thanks, Mark.
Nick, I'm really looking forward to going into this episode because I feel like all of us really want to achieve our peak performance and even look for ways to go beyond that, because regardless of what we're doing, the better we perform, the better results we get. So when we talk about that, before we do though, can you just give us a little bit into why you became a peak performance coach and some of the background on that story?
Yeah, sure. So it's been a passion, and I had a passion for me for God knows how many years now, but since I was about 15 or 16, I started off with Tony Robbins's books and tapes like a lot of people do, and it just progressed from there. And alongside this, this really interesting passion for, I'm trying to understand like why humans do and don't do things, like why are some so successful and really go out and crush it and do what they want in life, and then why do some people find it really difficult to struggle. And alongside this, I had over a decade of addiction to hard drugs and alcohol, which totally destroyed my life from a health perspective, relationships, finances, all of the things that come with addiction of that sort. And coming out the other side of that nearly 7 years ago now has given me a really interesting insight into habit creation and change, and a big part of the human experience when it comes to making and sticking with change, because that's obviously a huge part of everyone's life. So really it progressed from there. Those two experiences sort of merged, and I initially trained as a personal trainer, and my focus was weight loss and helping people go down that route, because ultimately there's always a running theme with what I wanted to do was help other people, and it was just always in line with the parts of life that I found most fascinating, which is the human experience and ultimately how to help people make change. And from the personal training aspect and avenue, it sort of morphed. I wanted to do something a bit differently. I wanted to step outside the typical personal training box, and it became, my biohacking background as well, sort of having an interest in biohacking, really sort of put it all melded together and created what is the current form, which is effectively helping CEOs, to perform at a higher level. Excuse me. Perform at a much higher level. I just find it fascinating. It's really interesting to communicate and connect with those sorts of people, and it's a great challenge to be able to help them deliver more performance, because ultimately they're already performing at a high level. What we typically find, as I'm sure maybe we'll get into in this interview, is that they're performing at a high level in certain parts of their their life, but other parts of their life sort of get sacrificed, and we can dive more into that as time goes on.
Yeah, I think we will. Because that is a really good topic for us to hit on. And one of the things I do want to talk about is that part of hitting your peak performance. Some people, they may feel like they're at their low right now in some area in their life. For some people, it's financial. For other people, it's personal. There are a lot of different areas. And you mentioned how you got out of the addictions that you had earlier. So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit on how you were able to get out of those and start building up to that peak level of performance.
I think, first off, a lot of failure was, the basis of getting out of the addictions, because I tried so many times to want to get out. But ultimately it was enough was enough, combined with getting expert help. And the combination of that really gave me what I needed to do to stay on the straight and narrow. So, addictions of those sorts are very rarely dealt with on their own. It usually takes a good team and a support from other people to be able to help you get out of that side of things. So, a guy called Peter Davison of Guildford in England was pivotal in helping me, bridge that gap and become the catalyst for me seeing seeing that side of life gone and put into the past where it should be. So yeah, I think that's about probably it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it's good to have that team around you, because if you do surround yourself with the right people, that's just going to have a big impact on you. I really believe that we were talking about this earlier, but you are the average of the 5 people who you surround yourself with. That was a little pre-interview conversation. So you talk about, like how to get out of that low, have the right people around you. But what else is there now for people who want to improve their performance? Because it's one thing to, get out of a rut. It's another thing to go higher and higher.
So it depends where you are. There's a ladder of performance, if you like, and everyone's at different levels. And I think the most important thing is to check to see if your foundations are in place. And what I mean by foundations are the basics, are your sleep, are your nutrition, your exercise, those sorts of things, right? And what we typically do in the Western world, in the modern world, is we look for the pill or the supplement or the biohack or the trick or the latest bit of tech to gain ourselves another level of performance. And what we miss is actually you can gain huge amounts more performance if you just hydrated properly, for example, right? If you actually understand hydration correctly and you dialed in your sleep a bit more effectively, just added a little bit of discipline before you went to bed around blue light and a few other things. And what you'll see is there's a monumental increase in levels of performance from those basics. Let's say you have those basics in place. You've got your sleep dialed in, you've got some good data around that demonstrates that you are sleeping and getting good quality of sleep, and you've got those other foundational components dialed in. Then it's a case of having a look at your stress levels and recovery, which is a big part of what I teach. So stress historically has always been quite an intangible conversation, right? It's like, oh, how stressed are you? Say, from a scale of 1 to 10. Well, it's so, it doesn't really give you any decent data saying, oh, I feel great. What does that really mean? So what we do is we actually use a bit of technology that's, imagine a Fitbit, but on steroids and not available for the general public. And we strap that to our clients for 3 days and 3 nights. And it actually gives us a graphical representation overlaid on what they're doing throughout the day of their recovery, their stress levels, their heart rate, and a whole plethora of other really interesting information. So the quality of data is the key, and the device that we use actually uses different technology to how most of the other devices use. They use optical reading for most of them. And what it gives us is this amazing graph. So we can actually see from the second they wake up to the second they go to bed, how well they are recovering in sleep and how stressed they are in certain parts of the day. And then we can start to implement strategic changes with one step at a time within those habits, within that lifestyle, to really maximize the foundational, the most important parts. And then we can go higher up the ladder and start to really fine tune and tweak and maybe add some biohacking stuff or supplementation. We also get, every client I work with gets bloods taken by a nurse, a doctor has a look through the panels. We really get an in-depth look at what's going on for that client. And only really when you've got that data, I believe, is the way that you can start to give the advice that they need, because we live in a world where it's like quite fashionable to be follow the keto diet or paleo or be a vegan or whatever, and a lot of it is really just dominated by our own biases. Like, it fits what we believe and what we think is right, but without actually getting any meaningful data to say, is that right for my biology? Because I believe that we're all unique and everything in life needs a unique approach rather than just blanket advising, giving blanket advice.
And it's really interesting how in that answer you gave some advanced stuff and some like super simple stuff, like the advanced thing being your tool. Like, we have all these different stats, like, more of like for your clients, more of like a one-on-one basis. But I mean, the other stuff, like, it's usually the advice that sounds boring. We know to do it, but that's the advice that wins out, like getting that extra water, getting that extra rest. And I feel like you mentioned people are looking for that magic pill or whatever it may be so that they suddenly achieve success. So how can we get better at, with our discipline, with some of the quote unquote boring things like, getting more rest and hydration and that stuff?
I think you've got to experience these things for yourself, because as you rightly point out, people talking about sleep and stress and water and all these sorts of things is not new. It's not new conversations around performance by any stretch of the imagination. It's only when you really experience being properly hydrated, actually having good recovery sleep, and all these other basic things, the foundational things, when you actually experience them optimally, then you start to understand the importance of them. And or at least the data that I've gathered from CEOs and other clients that I've worked with from all over the globe shows a picture that correlates very similar for most people, which is they think they sleep well, but actually the data shows something quite different. It doesn't matter if you sleep for 8 hours. If those 8 hours are, rubbish sleep, i.e. they've got very poor recovery, then you're setting yourself up for failure for the next day. So for me, if you don't have really high quality data that you can actually use and then change something and then actually measure, then really it's just guesswork. And what we find is actually what we perceive and what we think are good, i.e. we think we have a good night's sleep. Then we look at the data and we go, well, actually, the data's saying something quite different. So what we perceive as reality and what reality actually is are usually very different. And that's why I love where we're at with technology. And I think, the next 10 years is going to be really exciting into what we're doing, because it's coming to the point where people are starting to understand that we are individual. And we need to be supplying people, especially people who are interested in high performance, we need to be supplying them something that's unique to their personality, their biology, their DNA.
Now, I really love this focus on data because, when you think about peak performance and, what an episode like that's going to be, you hear some tactics, but, we're going really deep into data. So this is I really love when we get deep into data. So I'm wondering if you could share with us a little bit on how we get access to some data that can help us. I know that for people who want the whole picture, they can go to you because you offer that, you help people out with that. So for anyone else that is just trying to get some of the picture, maybe sleep or stuff like that, what are some ways we can get some data on that?
So there's lots of different ways. If you look at nutrition, for example, one great piece of data is if you eat something and you feel rubbish afterwards, that probably doesn't work well with you for a piece of, for food, right? So there's some really simple things we can use. We don't even need tech. And we know a lot of the time that maybe high carbohydrates for some people aren't very good and you feel quite tired and lousy afterwards. If you eat a meal and you feel, low energy and brain foggy and tired afterwards, there's something in that meal that isn't working well for you. Food should give you energy, right? And then I think above that, there's loads of bits of tech out there which can give you some data. The validity and quality of that data, it's difficult to quantify. I think the Oura Ring is probably quite a good place to start from a consumer-based product that you can wear all day long that measures sleep and some other metrics. I think that's probably the most accurate device on the market in the moment. They've done tests with proper ECG units which actually measure the brain, things you actually put in your head, within a clinical environment. And there's some good, I think, parts of the data that they get are fairly accurate. But it just depends what you're trying to achieve. For most people, if they're just looking to have better energy and and sleep better, then it's just about getting a bit more discipline employed around those, the diet and the sleep. For me, if you went for one thing and really went to town and learned and read and researched and become a master of, sleep would be it. And I say to people all the time, if sleep wasn't important, we wouldn't need to do it, right? And if you deprive yourself of sleep for enough time, you go crazy, which for me is a good demonstration to show that it's important. We know sleep's important, and I think one of the problems we live in a culture of, especially with the sort of CEO and the corporate environment, is sleep is for the weak, and there's loads of wonderful sayings that exist around showing that you sleep later and you work late into the night and you work as hard as you can. But actually, what you'll find is that just undermines your performance and the quality of work drops. So you may be doing more, but you're doing way less quality, and you could potentially get more done in less time when you are prioritizing the things that are important.
Yeah, that's a really great point because, I feel like a lot of people, they're boastful, they have, a lot of different jobs. Some people, based on their situation, they have to do that, but it's not good to brag about getting, not that much sleep and having that worker's badge because it's going to decrease your overall performance, and then all of a sudden, it takes you 2 hours to get an hour's worth of work done if you don't sleep long enough. One of the questions that I do want to ask is, I feel like there are times where we have all at some point felt like we've reached our peak performance, but then it drops off for some reason. Like for athletes, like you see them, they're at the peak performance. A lot of them dip at some point. There are some that really stay on that peak performance for a very long time, and it looks like they could have played a lot more years. So bringing this to a business context, how do we maintain our peak performance once we get there?
So I think it's an interesting one, and it's very subjective. It's like, how do you measure peak performance, right? And it's going to be different for everyone. So I think there's a baseline that needs to be drawn for people to understand, like, what is the norm for that person. So then you can have an understanding around whether you're actually exceeding or going below that. But I think, this is why it's so important to have an individual approach, a unique approach for each person, because there's so many nuances and so many factors. Like, for example, someone could have their sleep absolutely dialed in, right? They could be recovering, be doing all those things, the sort of foundations like we spoke about already, but have a really toxic relationship. They could be married to someone, or they could be surrounded with people at where they work, or a whole range of other things, and then really poor control over their mindset and the conversations in their head. Combine those two things, like, that is a huge bottleneck for performance. So they could be eating healthily, sleeping well, and doing all those other things that we talk about, exercising in the right way for their biology and all these things, but just be totally limited by these mental conversations they had, these relationships that they're in, and that being the bottleneck. So it's really a case of, you've got to look at a human being at every angle. You can't just go, well, diet's the most important factor. I mean, that's just not true. It's a important factor, right? Exercise is an important factor in an optimal human being. Sleep is an important factor, but none of these things on their own are the most important, right? And the reason I'm sort of explaining this way is because there isn't one straight answer. Like, how do you sort of give blanket advice for everyone to be, stay at their peak performance? It's like, you need to have a look at that individual and see what's going on. There are so many components. I'm probably going to write a book next year about the model of how I work with people and break it down. And actually, I was doing some work on that today, and it's like, there's, it's not just a case of like 4 components of how to live optimally. It's like diet, exercise, sleep, and health. There's so much more complication to that, because if you don't have your finances, if you've got super stress, a lot of stress around your finances, for example, that can be a huge performance bottleneck, right? The level of stress can be having a huge impact on your biology and your recovery and all the other aspects. So I haven't really given you the answer that you wanted. I've given you the answer I think is appropriate, because we are so different, and that's the wonderful thing about what I do. And the challenge I love is that we are so different, right? And finding what works for one person isn't just a case of writing a script for them. It's actually, right, you have to dive quite deep into it.
Yeah, I actually really like that answer, because any of the challenges that you have are different from the challenges that I have. And you listening to this episode, I mean, you've got some different challenges that you're going through that are different from, what your neighbor or your friend is going through. So we all have these different challenges. We all have different things that help us hit our peak performance, and different things that are slowing us down. Like Nick mentioned, it could be like someone's doing everything right but has a toxic relationship. So I agree that there's no one blanket answer that fits for everyone, but I am wondering if you could give us some insight on how do we identify the bottleneck, because some people, it's their relationship but they don't see it that way. So I'm wondering if you could share your thoughts on that.
That's a great question, actually, Mark. I think self-awareness is ultimately the underlying answer to that question. Is having a level of awareness that enables you to be able to see these things. But ultimately, that's where a good coach comes into play as well, or someone that you can, chat doesn't have to be a paid service to have a coach with you, someone that you can have a conversation with that can point out your blind spots, because those are things that we all have, regardless of whether you're a CEO, a primary school teacher, like whatever, a coach, student. It doesn't matter who you are or what you do. We all have our blind spots. And, it's like that thing sort of that's right in front of our face that everyone else can see, but we can't, right? So I think it's useful to have a coach on board to be able to spot those for you, or have someone that, you have a good relationship with, where you can be honest with each other and see those sorts of things. And then also having your own awareness around what's working. Because a lot of the time, I think we try and escape from things and cover up things because we're afraid to deal with it. Like some of these things that are, are scary, like having a conversation with someone we love, saying like, I don't think this relationship is working, especially if you've spent like 10 or 15 years with them. That's hard, right? That's challenging. So there's a level of honesty that's required from all of us if we want to really address these things. Like, with my addictions, there was a huge amount of stuff that I had to get honest about myself. And, I was being irresponsible with, and I was damaging relationships and my health and all these sorts of things, right? And it takes work, it takes time, and it takes conversations with the right sort of people that can help you in an effective way.
Yeah, that's a really great analysis. Definitely getting deeper into all of your thoughts. In some cases, like there is some bias. Like it's definitely a lot easier for you to say, like, I am perfect at everything. Like I am getting the sleep. I am doing all these things perfectly. But then you ask a friend, you get a coach, and it's something completely different. You learn a lot by not just looking inward, because you can learn that way, but by getting assessments from other people can help out as well. So we've talked about peak performance in the sense of this is how other people can thrive with peak performance and get better at getting the results they want to get. But I'm wondering with you personally, Nick, like we both of us know that habits are really important. And I'm wondering if you could share with us some of the habits you have right now that you would consider essential for your success.
So the most important habit for me really is one of the most important. I think it's difficult to sort of prioritize them like that, but sleep is absolute hands down. I wear blue blocking glasses, 2 hours before I go to bed every night, right? Because it's just proven, it's shown the science, but also just from my own experience, I know that it makes a profound difference. So I don't mess about with that. I'm much more of an get up early, go to bed early type guy. And that works for my biology, and that works for me. It doesn't work for everyone. And again, it's about figuring out what works for you. Instead of trying to force getting up early if you're not an early get up guy, right? Diet for me, like sugar has been the biggest nemesis for me. With like it fires such a similar pathways in the brain with regards to addiction, like for drugs. That's been the arch nemesis, and that's like one of the biggest sappers of performance for me personally, and for most people, I would say. So being really strict around well, not super strict, but like strict around like the sort of high sugary, highly processed foods. I try and steer away from those as much as possible. Keeping hydrated, like super key. And it's not just the water; it's the mineral content of the water, the salts. That's more of the hydrational side of things that people don't really aren't really aware of. They think just drinking more water is the right way. Well, a bit more complicated than that. And I think something that's actually come up for me recently is, what are your motivations for doing stuff? Like, what are my motivations for doing what I do, right? Because when you look at CEOs and you look at people who are driven, like yourself, 330 episodes, right? You're clearly a driven guy, yeah? And there are a whole range of people out there that have goals and aspirations to do things. And I think if you start having a look at the motivations behind that, it's really interesting, because a lot of the time we think we're doing what we want to do because we're doing it for ourselves. When actually what we find is we a lot of the time are doing things because we want to impress other people, right? And when you look at that and dig a little bit deeper into that, what that means is you're not actually living your life for what you want. You're living your life for what you think other people want you to do to be impressed by, right? If you think about that and let that sink in, because I know it's a bit of a long sentence there, but basically it means you're living your life doing what you think other people want you to do to look good, right? And when you start to analyze this, and really, again, it's always about honesty, like getting honest with yourself and starting to look deeper into, like, why am I putting Instagram photos up every 5 seconds? Like me doing cool poses and being with cool people and in cool places. Like, what is my motivation behind that? Is that for me, or is that to make me look like something that I'm not? Right? And I think there's a huge level of fulfillment that's lost when you're doing something for other people and you're not doing it for yourself. Because, when I remember the first time my business reached a really good financial milestone for me, we sort of pulled in about £15,000 in 1 month, and it was like, oh, amazing! I've been striving for this goal for a long time, and I got there and I was like, wow, this is like, it's not really that exciting. It's like, what does it really mean? And it got me thinking about, like, why am I doing this? What's the point, etc. And all those sort of wonderful big questions. And the root of it was simple. Actually, what I was doing is I wanted other people to respect me, and I wanted to fit in into other people's idea, because a lot of what society in the Western world, especially, and other parts of the world, obviously, we look at the idea of, oh, that guy earns loads of money, he must be successful. And then we bracket that with this idea of like, oh, that's what everyone's striving for. Well, it's not always the case, right? And there are plenty of people who are making a lot of money out there, but when you actually dig deeper, they're not fulfilled. So my whole point to that, this answering your question in this way, is it's really examining what you're doing and your motivations behind it, because fulfillment for me is success. Like, people talk about success a lot. Like, you've got breakthrough success written on your hat, right?
Yeah.
And success, people, we talk about, like, what is success? Like, oh, he's got a great job, he's got a great car, he's got a great house. Well, actually, success for me is whatever you want it to be, right? And you don't have to measure success in financial terms. You don't have to measure success in where you live, what you do, you know, your car, etc. You absolutely can, and I'm not saying that you should do it either way. I just think that the level of fulfillment and performance and happiness, which ultimately is all about for me anyway, is what are your motivations behind that? Are you wanting that level of success, those things, because you love them? Like, I love fast cars, right? The next car I want, I know exactly what I want, 600 horsepower, V8, twin turbo, totally unnecessary, but I love that sort of thing, right? I do that because I want it. But, you know, I hope that answers your question, right?
Yeah, I mean, I really like this idea where, I mean, you're giving us a bunch of different habits, your mentality also. I mean, I like how success, I mean, I feel like a lot of people are strictly money, but you could be really wealthy but not have the rest of your life together. So, I mean, money's just, I don't know all of them by heart, but I think money's like one of the 7 key areas of your life. Like, for some reason, I just remember the number 7 for some reason, but the idea is that money is important, but there's certainly more that we could be going after as well. And I think,
sorry, just to jump in there, I think also, like, what I'm not saying is you know, life is all rosy without money. Like, I think I love having lots of money. I think it's wonderful because it gives you freedom to do stuff, to help people, to do whatever you want with your life, right? And I have I have no right to tell anyone how they should or shouldn't live their life, right? I think we have this idea of, like, it's all or nothing. Like, you're either super rich and successful or you've got nothing. Like, there's more of a complex tapestry to be woven in life, right? And money, yes, is a currency that we use. And I think if anyone says that, you know, you can be super happy with having no money whatsoever, I don't think that's true. I think money doesn't buy you happiness, but it really helps in a lot of ways, right? But as you say, it's more than just finances. It's like it's ticking that box. And I think that for me is like the meaning of life. Like, that's the challenge of life, right? It's because, you know, people can go out there and have an amazing body and have the six-pack and all the things that people like covet and really want. And then other people can go out and have this wonderful lifestyle of jet setting and all the money and cars and all that sort of stuff, right? But actually, for me, the challenge is getting it all together. Like, I want the health, the body, the relationship. I want the money. I want it all to work, not really well in one area or 2 areas and then not so well in the other. And I think that for me, is the sort of the meaning of life, or the game of life, if you like, the challenge.
Yeah, and I like, again, how it's different for each person, as Nick that's been a running theme in this episode. Like, we all want success, we all want the big breakthrough, but that meaning is different for each person. Now, one thing I can't help but notice, Nick, is you have a lot of books behind you, and I'm wondering if you could share with us one book that you believe would have a good impact on us.
Oh, God. All right. I'm turning around. If anyone's listening to this and not watching the video, I'm turning around and having a look at my bookshelf. It's not all the books here. I've got a lot on Kindle, and I listen to a lot of audiobooks as well. Okay, if I was to pick one that's been the most, I tell you what, it will probably be this. Oh, Ronan Rat has fallen on the floor, bless him. So this is a book called The Surrender Experiment. It's by a guy called Michael Singer. He's also got another book which is escaping me at the moment. I've got it on audio, I think, if I remember rightly. Let me have a quick look. I've been listening to it. The Untethered Soul. So those 2 books for me have been really pivotal in the mindset side of things and the conversations that go on up here, because I think that's that's something I see quite a lot in the world is our inability to be with our thoughts and the conversations that are in them and getting wrapped up in it and all that. That's a big piece. So for me, Michael Singer's The Surrender Experiment and his other book, The Untethered Soul, those two in conjunction have probably been a really powerful impact on me.
Nick, thank you for those great book recommendations. Those will all be in the show notes, markguberti.com/E330. We will also throw in content marketing secrets in there as well. You can go on Amazon, search that, but we'll also have the link in the show notes as well. And before we wrap up this episode, Nick, I know you've shared a bunch of questions with us throughout our time together, just looking down at my notes really quick, what are your motivations for doing stuff and other questions like that. But do you have any other questions that you believe would have a positive impact on us?
Any other questions that have had a positive impact on me? What do you mean, sort of?
Oh, my bad. A question that we should be asking ourselves more often.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think the key question really is, why am I doing this?
That's
like, why am I really doing this? And that, as a friend of mine I had a conversation with yesterday, he does the 5 why question, right? Which is like, you ask yourself why you, and it's good if you get someone else to ask you, but you ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why am I striving for £100,000 a month or whatever your goal is, right? And then you give your first answer, and then you ask again and again and again and again for 5 times. And what you'll find is you'll start to dig deeper, and you may have to go further than that, but 5's a good benchmark. Dig deeper into like the real motivations. And when you start to dig this up, it's really interesting because actually it can become quite scary. Like, I know for me, when I said that, when I reached that financial goal I'd been striving for with the business, and it was all great in theory, and it's like, oh, we're here, and there was really that much excitement. There was a big void that I discovered. Like, there was a big sort of emptiness because I'd spent like 3 years building the business, and I'd pretty much done nothing apart from that, right? And I'd sacrificed social, and I was in that mentality that we talked about earlier, like work more, do more, work harder, get more done, and I'll be successful. And I think once you start asking these questions around the motivations, like, why am I posting these pictures on Instagram? Why do I want to be famous? Why do I want to have money? Whatever it is for you. And you start to be really truthful and honest with yourself, then I think stuff starts to unwind. And that can be uncomfortable initially, but just be with it, sit with it, and go with it, and then you'll be on an interesting ride for sure.
Nick, thank you for sharing those questions for us and all those great insights throughout our time together. If you guys want to learn more about Nick, I know he's got some private coaching services. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more on that and just some other places we could find you.
Yeah, so if you're a CEO and you want to get, dive deep into really what's going on with your biology, then just go to nickelvery.com or search for me, Nick Elvery, on LinkedIn. Those are 2 places you'll find me. You can connect with me through either of those. If you are an entrepreneur or corporate professional that wants to perform at a higher level, I do private coaching for them as well. I've got a couple of slots open at the moment. Again, just go to nickelvery.com, which I'm sure will be on the show notes from Marc, and also head over to LinkedIn and just search my name on there. And yeah, we can strike up a conversation.
Nick, thank you so much for sharing those resources with us and coming on Breakthrough Success. It was such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me on, Marc. I really appreciate it. And I love what you're doing, man. 330 episodes. You're knocking it out of the park. I mean, I think I'm on episode 50 with mine. And yeah, great work, buddy.